All right, good morning, everybody. Let's get started. Ecclesiastes is where we are. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Solomon's going to start talking about some wisdom, just different aspects of wisdom. And he's going to reach one of the conclusions here in this little section we're looking at, that wisdom is the fear of the Lord. That's what it is. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. I'm going to read a few of these verses, and you'll kind of get the tenor of what's going on here. He says, a good name, verse 1, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this also is vanity. Surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools, and say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. All right, I'm going to stop there. In the first section here that we're dealing with, but let's pray first, and then we'll deal with that. Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for your words. Thank you for each soul that's here this morning. Traveling and coming back home, and then for those that will be traveling, you give them safety as they go where they're going. And pray that you'd help us this morning, because we need your help. We desperately need your help this morning. And I pray you'd help us make applications where applications need to be made. And for the teachers that are teaching in the back, that you'd fill them with your Holy Spirit to minister your words to the kids. And I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. So Ecclesiastes 7 is where we are. Ecclesiastes it's a sermon, really. It's a sermon by King Solomon, and it covers life experience and things he's observed about life, and lots of things about vanity. He talks about where wisdom can be found. He kind of talks about at the end of this that there's a couple things that required of man in this life, and then some parts he describes just being content in life, and that can be of great value, where you learn how to be content. And so that all said, you get to this section, and really this part of Ecclesiastes, there's chapter 6 is tough, chapter 7, chapter 8, they're all kind of part of the same thought process, kind of the same way, but there's a little more light in chapter 7 dealing with wisdom, and that you can actually get wisdom in some tough places. And I think that's that's one thing that I really dislike about life and dislike about ministry, is that a lot of the good things are mined out of really bad on people. And so, but that's the nature of life, and that's the nature of wisdom sometimes. And so he says, wisdom is found at the end of something, and we'll deal with in the end. The first verse, he says, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. And in this part, since we're dealing with wisdom at the end, the day of death is how you can apply it to Christians. They, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. But what he's dealing with is not necessarily that. It has to do with a man's reputation. And with the idea of the precious ointment, you're trying to cover up some foul reputation you can't cover up. And so that's the idea. So I imagine Solomon looking over maybe the casket of a traitor or something, and he's looking into the casket and sees a man that's had a bad reputation, and no amount of perfume, there's no amount of, dressing up the body, there's nothing you can do to restore that bad reputation and what that man has done with his life. And so that's the idea. It's death is something that ends that doesn't end everything. It's your relationship with God goes on, whatever it is, and so. But at the end of life, there's a good reputation, a bad reputation, those kinds of things. And so that's the idea in verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment in the day of death than the day of one's life. What does that mean, a day of death and the day of one's life? Well, in birth, you have opportunity. And done is, well, put it this way, accomplishment is better than opportunity. That's the idea. There is, as an old proverb that says, call no man happy before his death. And I mean, some of you all have lived long enough to see the ups and downs of people's lives, and people live, long enough to become successes and then become failures. And so, and maybe start as failure, become success. The point is the opportunity at birth, there's opportunity, but opportunity and accomplishment the accomplishment's better. And the day of birth represents that opportunity, but opportunity, like I said, is not as great as accomplishment. So the day of birth is potential, but potential isn't superior to good character or accomplishment. So that's kind of verse 1. Good name is better than precious ointment, the day of death than the day of one's birth. It's better, and I say that because the next thing that he starts talking about is mourning and grief, and you go to the funeral home or you go to the casket, and that's troubling. It's bad. But there's more to be learned there than there is at the football stadium. You're not going to learn life lessons at the concert. You're going to have fun at the concert, but you're not going to learn anything there. And so that's the idea. In verse 2, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. There's more value to the house of mourning. You don't. It says in verse 2, for that is the end of all men. There we go. There's the end again. That's the theme, the end of this thing. Wisdom's in the end. That is the end of all men, and the living will lay better than being entertained. It's not, you don't have to be too spiritual about all this, but you need a little bit of lightheartedness sometimes, but you can't live there, and you can't live in the house of mourning either. But there's more value in the house of mourning, and so you confront the end of life. You come face to face with death, and now you're kind of more prepared to live now. What I think there's some saying you're not ready to live until you're ready to die, something like that. That's kind of is the idea. The living needs to come face to face with the end, and probably hear what Solomon's saying, or probably not here right now. Not that they don't go. They're not in this church. I just mean they're maybe sleeping off a hangover or something like that. The ones that need to hear what Solomon's saying don't spend as much time in the places they need to spend time in, so they can learn things about life. And this, by the way, is a New Testament. It's a New Testament principle about dying daily, and Paul talks about that. Jesus Christ talks about that. Take up your cross, follow me, things like that. Then he says, verses 2 through 4 are very similar. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. That's very true. There are some folks that go through a very hard time, loss, things like that, and they get bitter, and it's troubling, and it's always troubling, but it messes them up. But I would say for a lot of people who go through loss and grief, what it does is it makes you better. It makes you more adept at comforting people. It makes you more understanding, more empathetic, and more sympathetic. And it helps you come to the realization of life and the brevity of it and things like that. And so sorrow is better than laughter. For by the sadness of the countenance, verse 3, the heart is made better. That's how it's made better. Verse 4, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. There kind of it is again. But the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. That's where they're spending their time, just being entertained. And that's kind of the worldly philosophy of we just eat, drink, we be merry, and tomorrow we die. And that's the idea. But in reality, you spend some time in grief, you spend some time in sorrow, and deal with things that are realities of life, not being distracted from realities, but dealing with realities of life. That makes your life better and makes you, again, more sympathetic, more empathetic, those kinds of things. Then he goes on to say, verse 5 and 6, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. So this is a better thing. All of these things, he says, these are better. When you compare them and you put them on a scale, this thing is better. It has more value. This house of mourning, it has more value than the concert. This has more value than the baseball game. This end of life confrontation has more value than laughing at funny jokes all day. These things just have more value. And so it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. And that's that's true. And if you can learn how to take a rebuke, if you can learn how to listen to instruction, you'd be better for it. Most of our time, and probably, I think, because there's so much access to entertainment and music and things like that in generations coming up, everybody's got their playlist, everybody's got their, they're in their own movie, they're in their own sort of soundtrack, and nobody's getting better for it. You're just listening to music, you're just in your own little world. You're not dealing with things that are real in life. And so, and I guess it's for any age group, but I just notice it more with the younger generation, and they've grown up with so much access to entertainment. It's just, you're so distracted by everything. It's rare you come in contact with the reality of life because you're so distracted by entertainment. You're so consumed with being, I need to have fun, and I need to be fun, I need to have fun, and so all of that stuff is just removal from reality and what's real in life. And so he says correction's better than the current hit song. It's just better. You need to hear it. You need to learn from it. That's where wisdom is found. And because wisdom is found in the end of the thing, the house of mourning, death, and all that, he says this in verse 7. This is how wisdom gets destroyed, first of all. Surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. So now he's going to deal with, you find out where wisdom is found. It's at the end of something. Then, at least that's one place it's found. Second, this part, he deals with how wisdom gets destroyed in a person's life. Surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. So here's simple verse, two polar opposites. Oppression is pain, that is suffering. And pain and suffering can make a wise person just go crazy. I've got some books in my office up there. They're written by people in prison who have been imprisoned for preaching. There's one, I think, solitary sermons from solitary confinement or something like that. And this man was it's not Harlan Popov. It's what's the other? Anyway, he's in prison, solitary confinement for years. and he's just writing. He writes down thoughts, or he remembers thoughts, and he comes to a point where he can write them down. And some of the things are just crazy thoughts. But that comes from the pain and suffering. I mean, you're sitting in solitary confinement. You've been tortured, and you lose just lose touch with reality. And so that's what Solomon says. Look, oppression, pain, that side of life can make someone who's wise go crazy. But then he also says the other side of that is true as well. Pleasure, the excess of pleasure, can make someone go crazy as well. Surely oppression makes a wise man mad, and a gift destroys the heart. That's like bribery. So you had good judgment, but now this opportunity for pleasure, this opportunity for money, this opportunity for resources, whatever it is, shows up, and now all that wisdom goes out the window because there's this introduction to something that is completely pleasurable. So verse 7 is sort of two ends of the spectrum, and this is how wisdom gets destroyed. It can get destroyed in an immense amount of pain, or it can get destroyed in an immense amount of pleasure. And so these things, you'll find us all through Ecclesiastes. There's a lot of balance. It's just, there's some things that are better. This needs to be balanced, and you'll find that all through here. So that's verse 7. Wisdom's, what happens with it when it's destroyed? So then, verse 8, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. So if wisdom survives the pain and pleasure, I mean, this is the idea. Here's the trial. The trial's pain, the trial's pleasure, and if it survives, then you understand better is the end of the thing, because that tells you what it is. Better is the end of the thing than the beginning thereof. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. So there's, because again, wisdom's at the end, therefore a quick temper, that's a sure, a sure avenue, a sure road to acting foolish, a quick temper. If you can't control that stuff, it's gonna hurt you. You end up acting foolish. So better is the end of the thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Along those lines, verse 9, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. I hope you're kind of tracking along with what Solomon's going through. He's dealing with the conclusion, the end, and so some of these principles are coming out of all that. Like if you're impatient, if you can't wait till the end, then you're going to be a fool. If you can't deal with the trouble that comes in between the beginning and the end, then what ends up happening is foolishness. And so that's the idea. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. There's a lot to be said about all that stuff. And then verse 10, I'm going to keep going because we've got a little bit here to deal with. Say not thou, verse 10, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. So now he's kind of getting on to, it's the same thing that Zechariah did, the prophet. When it's those days were so much better, those days were so much better, those days were so much better. Well, you can't live in those days. Those days are gone days. And Zechariah, one of the prophets, the minor prophets, he's there dealing with the rebuilding of the temple. And as they're rebuilding the temple, there is some crying, there is some complaining about this isn't like it was. Anybody remember there's a famous verse that goes with what Zechariah says, and he scolds some of the older generation because they're complaining about, well, this isn't like it was, and we had better things, and things were better back then. And Zechariah says, despise not the day of small things. And that's a little phrase in there, but a lot of Zechariah's preaching is directed to some of that. It's this, I don't know, nostalgia's okay, but you can't live in the past. It's done. It's there's nothing to go back to with that. So patience, wisdom, all these things are all tied together, living through trouble and whatever, enduring to the end, so to speak. All that's tied up with all this, what Solomon's saying. Say not thou, what is the cause of the former days, that they were better than these, for thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. There's a lot in there that probably preach on that verse alone. But wisdom's found in the end. That's the first idea here. The second thing now, in this little section, is how wisdom gets used. How does it get used? So starting in verse 11, he says this: wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there's profit to them that see the sun. So if you're alive, you see the sun. If you're living and you got an inheritance and you're wise, then that's good. That's profitable. It's not profitable for dead folks, and it's not profitable if you don't get the inheritance, but he says an inheritance is good to the wise if they're living and all that kind of thing. Wisdom's good with an inheritance, and by it there's profit to them that see the sun. 4, verse 12, wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. So wisdom can protect you. Money can also protect you. That's true. But money can't do everything that wisdom can do. And just an illustration of the money side of this, I remember dealing with some sort of tax issue for somebody, trying to help them through this thing. And I don't know, we spent hours dealing with paperwork, the tax office people, it wasn't here in Beeville, I think it was state something or other. But you don't have this piece of paperwork, you need this, you need to go get this done, and we're emailing, calling, email, call, well, that's going to take 2 weeks, and that's going to take a week, and we've got to do this, and that's going to take 3 weeks, and all that stuff. And after about, I don't know how many hours of this, doing this, I remember asking the lady on the other end when I was talking to her on the phone, I was like, so how much is this going to cost? Because that's the end goal. What is the price of this? And she said, well, if all of this, at this point you owe whoever owes $77. And so I told who I was working with, I was like, we're just going to pay $77 and save a month's worth of work here and quit dealing with this. The point is money answers these things. In a lot of cases, it does. And when you're dealing with taxes, it does answer that. So money's a defense, but wisdom is a defense, and wisdom's a better defense, though. Wisdom's a better defense. Probably better not to get into those situations. If you can avoid them, not to get into those situations. But they're not always unavoidable. But the idea here is money is something, but it's not wisdom. And there's a good verse in Proverbs that kind of goes along with this. What's the word? Connection, not the connection, but the comparison. It's like the comparison of wealth and righteousness. And he says, riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. And that's true. It shows up multiple times in the Bible where Israel is being judged, and you've got these enemies coming in, and the Lord will say of the enemies, they don't regard gold or silver. And that's just a man-to-man thing. But with God, definitely money is not a defense. Money is not something that he regards at all. Wisdom is, though. Wisdom is. And only wisdom can give life where money can't. Wisdom's life-giving. He says that in 12. Wisdom is the defense, money is the defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. So that's better than money. Then verses 13 through 18, he starts to deal with wisdom as the fear of the Lord. So you find wisdom at the end. You find out what it was in the end a lot of times, or you find wisdom at the end. Then you find some of wisdom's value here. And then he describes what wisdom is. And this is it's just so true here. Verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider. God also has set the one over against the other to the end that man should find nothing after him. So you don't find anything in death. That's the idea. All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness. There is a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldst thou destroy thyself? Be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldst thou die before thy time? It's good that thou shouldst take hold of this. So what he just said, take hold of it. Yea, also from this withdraw not thy hand, for he that feareth God shall come forth of them all. What is he talking about? What Solomon observes is probably what you and I have observed, but not everything in life you can figure it out. He says, in days of prosperity, enjoy it. And when trouble hits, consider it, because you're not going to learn anything. It's once you're dead, you're not going to get anything out of it. But then also, he says, I've seen the wicked live long, and then I've seen the righteous die early. And what I learned from that is, I don't know everything that's going on. I can't figure it all out. I just can't figure it all out. So the point is, my responsibility is not to figure it out. My responsibility is to fear God, who has the whole thing under his scope and purview, so to speak. So wisdom is seen in an attitude toward God. It's not seen in necessarily the ability to understand why everything is happening. Solomon himself said, I can't figure out why this is going on. I can't figure out why I just said wisdom is life to them that have it, and then I'm also telling you that righteous people die early. What does that mean? That means there's other principles at work that I don't understand. It's like, so you have a principle working. So let's say this. It's true that if you wear a seatbelt, then you're safer probably in a car wreck than someone who's not. That's true. But does everybody that wears the seatbelt live through a car wreck? No, because there's other things at work. There's other principles going on. And Solomon says, I can't identify everything that's going on. I can observe that this one was acting according to right principles and they died early. And I can observe that this one was acting wickedly and they keep living. So I don't know how this all works out. My job isn't to know how it all works out. My job is to fear God. He's the one that has all of this stuff accounted for. He's the one that he's the ultimate judge of all this. And so wisdom is the fear of God. And he starts to explain some of this because this is going to be one of the conclusions he comes to. Wisdom is more about sometimes the attitude you bring to the situation, specifically fear of God. So he talks about going forward a little bit here. Some of the stuff we could just really make into its own commentary here, but he says in verse 15, all things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There's a just man that perisheth in his righteousness. There's a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. I don't understand that, but it happens. My job isn't necessarily to understand it, though. So then he goes on to say this, be not righteous over much. What in the world does that mean? That almost sounds carnal. It almost sounds like don't be too spiritual, but that's not what he's saying. The example of people who are righteous over much is the Pharisees. It's self-righteousness. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. You think you know more than you do. You think you're better than you are. That's the idea. And Solomon says, don't do that. You don't know what you think you know sometimes, and you're not as holy as you promote yourself to be. At least for sure the Pharisees. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldst thou destroy thyself? So you've got two ends of the spectrum here again. Self-righteousness, it is very self-destructive. This idea that I don't know, it's kind of like I think of a university professor or something like that, but someone who is just education is the answer to everything, and they think they've got it. They think they're a part of that solution. And so Solomon's like, that's not it. That's not what it is. Don't think those things. Over righteousness, self-righteousness, that's destructive. Someone who thinks they're more wise than they are, that's self-destructive. Those two things are self-destructive. But then the other side of that is self-destructive too. Verse 17, be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. So don't be self-righteous, but don't be so, we can be good at this, so fake and falsely humble. Woe is me. I'm just, I can do nothing. I just deserve all this terrible stuff and all that stuff. Some of that stuff's just fake. It's just false. Or be not over much wicked where you just throw out holiness completely. Just like, what's the point of it? And so, hey, what's the point of it? And Solomon says, well, that's destructive too. You can be a Pharisee and be self-righteous, that's destructive. Or you can throw away righteousness, and that's destructive too. Those you got balance and wisdom are somewhere in the middle of all that stuff. So over righteous, self-righteous, you got that, it's destructive. False humility, accepting sin, that's also destructive. And then he comes to the point here in verse 18 of really what all he said. It's good that thou shouldst take hold of this. Yea, also from this withdraw not thy hand, for he that feareth God shall come forth of them all. Not the guy that's super smart, not the guy that's over righteous, not the guy that has it all figured out. The guy that fears God, that's the one that comes out okay. That's the idea. In all of this, you're not going to figure everything out. There's wisdom to be found in the end. There's an application of wisdom to the living. All of that said, wisdom really is what it is. It's the fear of God. And so that's a conclusion he comes to here at this little section here. So wisdom as the fear of the Lord. And I'll wrap it because we've covered so much here, but I'm going to wrap it up with that. That is the idea of this first little section here in Ecclesiastes 7. Wisdom is the fear of the Lord. That's the right attitude with all of these other things being set in motion. That's the right attitude. Father, thank you for these words. Thank you for this time together. I pray it's been helpful. And again, for those that are traveling, I pray you get them back safe. And those that are here, Lord, I pray we'd learn what we need to learn out of your words. These are just really down to earth observations about life, and real observations, true observations